so I went over to the university and found a parking spot and went over to his office. And when I walked in the door, he said, I was really interested in the things that you were saying, because he said, I've taught Revelation about 4 times over the years in church. And so he started to ask me questions, and we started to discuss some books that we had read in addition to the Bible. Matter of fact, we had both read a book by Sir Isaac Newton, the scientist. From 1733, he wrote a book on the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation, and both Dr. Schaefer and I had read that book. So we had this great conversation going for about an hour. During the time, he says, you ought to write a book, which I just dismissed as being, conversation. And so we continued on and had a wonderful time talking back and forth. And then he said, well, I've got to make my lecture. And so I started to excuse myself, and I said, really, I want to thank you for this time. You've been, it's been a lot of fun. I said, I'm not sure why the Lord put us together, but I really appreciate it, and thank you. He stopped, and he looked at me very intently, and he said, no, he said, I think you're supposed to write a book. And then he said this. He said, maybe I said that because for years my friends have been telling me that I should write a book about science and my faith. And he said, last week I finished the manuscript. And he reaches over a table and puts the manuscript in front of me. He says, here, would you like a copy? Well, this was pretty an incredible situation. I mean, the Lord says to me, see Dr. Schaefer. Dr. Schaefer just finishes a manuscript on his book, and I go to see him, and he says, I'm supposed to write a book.
You're supposed to write.
Well, this is what I wrote first, and the book's title is Of the Last Days. Listen, I Tell You a Mystery. I meditated on the message that Dr. Schaefer had given me for about a month, and then I started to write. It took me a little over a year and a half to write, and it's a comprehensive study and commentary on all the major prophecies and how they all fit together. And then I had this book published, and it came out in July of 2003. And so I had the book, just like you see it here.
Right.
And this is you can get this on Amazon.com if you're interested.
Okay.
And so I had the book, but it's clear that the Lord told me to write it, but He never really told me what to do with it. Every time I went to promote it and advertise it, go to a Borders or Barnes and Noble for a book signing, it was like, no, that was not what I was supposed to be doing. So I started to go back to the Lord, and I said, what do you want me to do with this book? I said, month after month, for about several months. And finally one day, all He said was, I want you to take what I've given you to the pastors. They'll test it, and they'll know what to do with it. So I thought, oh, that's perfect. So I would go do that. So I went and talked to all the pastors that I knew and was acquainted with, which was about 12, I think. And as I went to them and gave the message that the Lord had given me to give them, everybody was very polite and listened to the message. Nobody really responded positively or negatively. In other words, I felt like I wasn't getting through, or nothing was really happening as a result of it. And so I decided on my own to stop. This wasn't really, serving a purpose. So I stopped taking this message around. Well, a few months later, I'm studying through the book of Ezekiel, and I get up to chapter 33 about the watchman. So if you see trouble coming, the watchman's supposed to sound the alarm, let his countrymen know. Because if you don't, you see trouble coming, and you don't sound the alarm, then the blood is on the watchman's head. Well, the Lord got my attention. He said, you're not done with that assignment I gave you. And I said, you don't want this blood on your head. So I said, okay. And I told you I was in corporate management. I know how to get organized. I know how to, complete a task and set a goal. Well, I made a list of every pastor in Athens, Georgia. And I proceeded to go through that list. And the list was started off at 160 pastors, all denominations. And, one by one, I'd call them up and invite them to lunch or whatever, would work. And it took me a year and a half. And I went through the list, and I had given the message out to 145 pastors. 86 of them I sat down with at lunch or someplace and gave the message, not much different than the way we're talking now. And I should probably stop right here and say, the message was this. It wasn't like, the book's the message. The Bible is the message.
Right.
But the message was simply this, is one, God wanted me to communicate to them about the resurrection of the dead and the rapture of the living and the timing. And he said simply, a lot of people are mistaken about that. And he said, what I said is, after the tribulation of those days, at that time, the whole world will see the Son of Man coming in glory and power on the clouds. And he will send his angels with a trumpet call and gather the elect from heaven and from earth. And so he wanted me to communicate when the Lord was going to return for his elect, the church. And he also said that the second part of the message was this, is now is the time that we're supposed to be teaching what the Scripture says about the Lord's return and the coming kingdom. And then the third part of the message was, if we don't wake up, if we don't watch for the things that Christ has given us to watch for as indicators of when he's coming, he said the consequences would be catastrophic. So it was a three-part message. He said, expect that I will come when I said, after the tribulation of those days. Now we should be teaching about this in the household of God. And three is, if we don't wake up, the consequences will be catastrophic.
Well, did that lead into writing this other book that
you got? Well, you see, and I had that book. I had the first book, which is Of the Last Days, Listen, I Tell You a Mystery. And I was giving this message out, and I ended up giving it out to 145 pastors. And everyone that met with me, I gave them a copy of that book. And by the way, as I was writing the book, the first book, a brother told me that I should put up a website. And everybody wants website addresses these days, so I'll give you mine. It's www.lastdaysmystery. It's kind of taken from the title of the first book, lastdaysmystery.info, INFO. So if you want to get this information, matter of fact, if you're interested in the first book, which was a complete biblical study, it's all available free on the website, chapter by chapter. And the address again is www.lastdaysmystery.info. So I was getting toward, I had one pastor left to go on my list that I had started, and that was in November of 2005. And as I was coming to the end of that assignment, I felt like God was saying, finish this, I've got something else for you to do. And I was telling my friends about this, and I'd say, well, the Lord is always doing amazing things, but I'm not sure if it's because I'm just ready to be done with this assignment, or that He's really speaking to me. But I felt like He was saying, finish this assignment. I've got something else for you to do. November of 2005, a literary agent contacts me out of the blue. I wasn't looking to get published. I wasn't putting in proposals or doing anything. I just done what the Lord had given me. And sure enough, a literary agent's on a search for Penguin Publishing, one of the top 5 publishing houses in the country. And she's on a search for somebody to write this book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Last Days. And she says, will you write it for us? And I said, I guess I will. And we negotiated, talked about it, and they gave me a very short time frame, and I had 4 months to write this book. But
this was the book that you met him. He was signing, right?
Yes, this is the one that he was in Borders and that you were signing.